Hey,
Everybody,
hey.
we are here. Welcome to the CXO and CHRO Walk Into a Bar, where we share insights at the intersection of talent and revenue. I'm Michelle Strasburger, CEO of HR Rebooted, a fractional HR consulting firm focused on rebooting culture.
I'm Dominic St. Fleur, CEO of Intramark. We create a data layer on culture to help organizations identify unwanted, hidden risks like unwanted turnover and productivity gaps. And we have a special guest today, Cindy. Cindy and I go way back, and so happy to have you join us with this conversation. But Cindy, please do introduce yourself for the audience, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm Cindy Joseph, she, her pronouns. I'm the CEO and founder of the C-Suite, and we work with organizations to enhance all kinds of people practices, and we can get into that.
Absolutely.
I'm so excited to have you here, another fellow CHRO at the table, or at the bar today.
I'm outnumbered today.
You're outnumbered today. We're going to take over. So today we're talking about a very interesting topic. I think we might have to do a part 2 on this someday, because I think this conversation can go a lot deeper than we're going to be able to do in 30 minutes. But we're talking about navigating the political climate, specifically to stick with or ditch DEI. There was an article that came out recently around six big companies ditching DEI, and then on the alternative 6 that are sticking with it. And so this is something that is on the minds of the C-level executives and organizations, and how do we interpret that information and then go from here. So I'm grabbing a glass of wine at the bar for this one. Dominique?
Michelle, this is the strongest beverage I've seen. You've grabbed during our you quote unquote grabbed during our LinkedIn lives. This must be a big one. This must be a big topic.
It's a big one.
All right, so I'm a grab. For me, this is a gin and tonic level. It's strong enough. I think it's definitely strong enough. But I'll see what. Maybe we need to up it. I might up it. As the conversation progresses. Cindy, how about yourself?
Oh, I think I'm with you on something with like vodka.
See, I feel like vodka is stronger than wine for me, but we'll go with that.
It's a good topic. Okay.
So
awesome.
I think we should start with defining DEI and then dive into the conversation from there. So Cindy, I know we spoke earlier this week, and you have a lot of great insight on this. Would love to hear what you think.
Yeah, and I'll try to keep it simple and not get into a bunch of HR speak. But at the end of the day, I think it's really about making sure everyone gets a fair shot. In a perfect world, when someone walks into a workplace, they should be able to do their work and get ahead based on what they're capable of doing and what they contribute. And, that's really what we aim to do when we're engaging in a lot of these DEI practices. I think DEI also encourages people to feel that they can come to work and be respected and not have to change important parts of themselves just to survive the workplace. And whether or not you understand the acronyms or the specific details around it, I think, honestly, that's all most people want, right? They want to go to work, be compensated fairly for the work that they do, have an equal opportunity to advance if that's their aspiration, and to be treated with respect.
Absolutely.
I think of it very similarly. And anybody in the audience, too, if you want to chime in, would love to hear what your definition of DEI is. And I think it's that same thing of being able to bring your whole self, right? And there was this concept that I learned kind of early on of cloaking, and people will cloak or change, like you said, who they are when they come into the workplace. And I had somebody on my team once say something to me when we were talking about, we were actually using a personality profile, and we were going through it. And she said, yeah, that's who I am at work, but I'm not the same person at home. I'm a very different person at home. And it made me sad that she felt like she had to transform who she was at work and couldn't bring her whole self and her whole personality. Because when we pretend to be something, it's exhausting. It drains us, and it doesn't fill our buckets, and we leave exhausted at the end of the day.
And so just kind of listening, right? Everything that's said here kind of seems like, why would there be pushback with DEI? Like, who wouldn't want to be authentic at work? Bring some, pizzazz, different personalities. We're not robots. It's obvious that we're different people, but also, promote equal opportunity. Why would there be pushback to DEI like we've seen recently, and climate or not?
I ask myself that every day.
Now I'm like, do I up the ante here? Because I have so many thoughts. I do think that there are people who feel threatened by it, right? One, because maybe there's a lack of understanding of what it is. But also, when you've been in power for a long time and now you're being asked to either share power or, think about it differently, that can feel threatening for folks. And I think all this talk about reverse discrimination is, while it's floating out there as a reason to dismantle DEI, it's largely unfounded. And, I asked the question, if people of color and women and other marginalized communities were actually being given something that they're not due based on DEI, then why aren't more of them running large corporations, right? Why aren't C-suites more diverse? Why are most organizations, at least when I think about the 100+ that I've engaged with, why aren't they more diverse overall? So I think there's a lot of noise and threat, but I'm not sure that we have any data to back up some of those claims of reverse discrimination.
Mm. So it sounds like there's, because just kind of in speaking with folks in the market as well, there seems to be a lot of differing views of this. I'm glad we defined DEI, right? It's more about that equal opportunity. It's about creating an environment where everybody can thrive, not just at the expense of any other group. It's about creating an environment that everybody could thrive. There's a certain threshold, within an environment where people start to feel included when it comes to population-wise, right? And I forget the exact stat, but it's usually around a fourth or a third, where the where people see other people that are similar to themselves, then they, with that critical mass, start to feel included. Yeah. So with this mission, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of just misconception on what DEI is. What are some common misconceptions? How can we debunk them? How can we deal with them?
Yeah, I think similar to what Cindy said, I think, the reason that we're stepping away from it too, I think, is fear. And that's around the same thing of not really understanding it. I think when people talk about DEI, they think affirmative action, that I have to have an affirmative action plan and I have to hire for numbers, right? I have to hire so many of this race. I have to hire so many females. I have to hire so many males. And that's not the case, right? And DEI is not affirmative action. And I think there is a sense, and maybe it's really not understanding it, that brings that fear. But I think it's that other noise around DEI that I think creates concern and fear for organizations.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there is a misconception in some corners that it's about quotas and giving people who are not, this is what we heard all last year, right? Giving people who did not earn their position a position or an opportunity to advance or whatever the case may be. So that's definitely a one concern, I think, that can be out there. I also think that there's a misconception that DEI excludes straight white men, that it's only about women, people in the LGBTQ community, people who are people of color, people who have but like it excludes straight white men. And I think that is a big misconception. I know in the work that I do, we try to bring everybody into the conversation because Frankly, one of the first things I teach about diversity in and of itself, like I am not a diverse person. You, Dom, and you are not a diverse person. We need people of different groups. It's the mix of people that creates diversity. But if I'm with a bunch of other Black women, we're just Black women, right? So I think there's a misconception about who is even included in the conversation. And the more that we can consider how all of us create diversity and diversity of thought and diversity of experience and how that benefits organizations and benefits teams and things of that nature, I think we can debunk that one a little bit. We still have work to do because the equity part says we're not on an equal playing field. We don't all have the same access to opportunities. Let's figure out how we can fix that. But it's not that it then excludes other people from being part of the work.
And that's in a lot of it's been very rare in my a lot of conversations I've had around diversity, equity, inclusion that it's stated very clearly that straight white men are not excluded from this. It is not creating opportunities for others at the expense of others, right? And I think that's such an important message to get across. It's more of a collaborative, growing the pie rather than taking more share of a static size of a pie, right? It's about how do we make things bigger, more prosperous for everybody. And there are obvious benefits, to having a diverse workforce with diversity of thought. There are multiple studies on, especially as we talk about the intersection of talent and revenue, right? What are the impacts to revenue? With an organization that embraces concepts of DEI, if not DEI, as a whole, versus those that don't. What have you guys seen? What have you two seen, out in the market? What are some differences between organizations that do this well and don't do this well?
I think, not quoting any data because I don't have it in front of me, but I think the difference is between winning and losing. I think if you are a CEO and you're just making decisions from your office, those decisions aren't as thought out as they would be if you went to your leadership team, which had a person from every department weighing in on a decision and giving you pros and cons. Now let's take it to the next level. If you've got people from different aspects of your community that you're serving or your employees weighing in, you're going to get additional thoughts and feedback. And so it just broadens that. It minimizes the risk of error because you're getting all the information that you wouldn't have otherwise received. Because I bring to the organization everything that makes me me, right? Where I grew up, my ethnicity, my religion, my family status, my everything, my traditions. I'm bringing all of that to the organization, and so I have that perspective when you're trying to make decisions of like how that might affect people in a similar experience. And if you're missing that, you're making decisions without you're not making a well-rounded decision, right? You're missing out on that. And I do think it comes down to that winning and losing, because instead of doing the ready, fire, aim, you're just firing and hoping you hit a shot.
Cindy, I'd love for you to add onto this, because I have a little bit of a nerdy analogy to make to what Michelle said. I want to save it after you've had a chance to speak, because I don't want to lose the audience after right when I start to get into my nerdy side of things. But go ahead, Cindy.
Yeah, no, I'm sure you will not lose anybody. But I agree with Michelle. It's interesting. I don't talk as much about the financial benefits of DEI, not because that they're not there. I mean, every year, McKinsey, Deloitte, PwC, they're all going to put out some report telling you that organizations that are more diverse have higher revenue, stronger innovation, all of the things that we want for our businesses. I tend not to talk about it as much because I find that when we anchor to money, first of all, I'm not sure that it's moved people enough toward embracing some of these principles. But also when money is no longer the carrot, if you will, So in economic downturns, certainly we're seeing now with the social climate, it becomes easy to sort of back away from the work that is fundamentally, important for all kinds of reasons. But yeah, I agree with Michelle. There's so much data out there that tells us everything from like having more women on boards to how diverse the C-suite is, to how diverse the organization is, will benefit the organization, both internally in terms of innovation and how people, work together, et cetera, but also, externally being able to connect with customer groups and things of that nature. There have been so many stories of a company releasing a product or making a decision, and I know for me in my community, we just look at each other like there were definitely no Black people on this. this you know automatically that like there's no way that they consulted anybody before doing this, and could have avoided a whole PR nightmare or a downgrade to their credibility with their customer, right? So there are lots of reasons why it's important to pay attention to this just from a pure business standpoint.
And Cindy, Michelle, what you both said, where my mind went was the stock market, right? When we think about, because what you're basically saying, right? Of course, there is positive impacts to revenue, but I look at it as well as risk management. Mm-hmm. Not only in the cases where you missed something that was obvious, that was not the best light to, for a particular group, but when I think about a stock portfolio, right? And when I invest in one stock or maybe 5 stocks that are all very similar, I may be on the upward trajectory, but it's very choppy, right? The volatility is quite choppy because I have all the same stocks. Yes, we're going up and to the right, but it's a roller coaster up and to the right. However, if I have a portfolio of stocks where correlation's not, it's not highly correlated, I have a good mix of different industries, whatever it is, we're still going up and to the right, but it's a lot more smooth, right? So volatility's, controlled. And that's kind of where and again, I hope I didn't lose half the audience, so I do apologize if I did, but that's kind of where my mind went was, if you want to manage risk but still grow, right? Having more of a diversified portfolio and, in our case, workforce, you get that thought. And Michelle, I like what you said, right? It's like, okay, it's the difference of a CEO going in, making a decision on their own. That's very volatile. Okay, they bring in the team. Okay, a little bit less volatility, but you bring in a diverse team where you really start to, poke at different angles and aspects that are informed by a plethora of history. And Cindy, one small example of many is we probably shouldn't release this ad, as a very basic, and that's going to really, impact. That's just a small example of many, many instances of where having a diversified quote unquote portfolio that's informing the decisions of an organization. Again, you're going up and to the right, but in a much, much smoother trajectory, in my opinion, when it comes to, and really embracing diversity and kind of making it intentional. I think same way you would treat your stock portfolio and you would intentionally diversify that. I think same with the workforce. It's good business risk management just kind of what came to me. But enough of that. No more stock market analogies.
Interrupt you, Dom, because I have an example. So I think that, just generally, I think the stock market was a great example. Your financial advisor tells you to diversify. So diversity makes sense, right? But I think you also think with your own lenses on, right? And you do things with your own lenses. So the things that make us who we are, we bring to the table. But that's how we do our work too. And so you need diversity to open that up and put different lenses on. So I have an example. I made a presentation once earlier in my career, and I was so proud of it. It was like a new hire orientation or something like that. So proud of it. And I presented it to the team in Virginia, which is where they were going to use, most of them were going to use the presentation because we hired a lot. And in Manchester, New Hampshire, where I did the presentation, we were mostly white. And in Virginia, where the presentation was going to be made, was mostly Black. And so I presented it. I said, isn't this great? It's wonderful. Yes, like, hurrah. And the feedback was, there's nobody that looks like us in these slides. And it took that minute of like, like, of course, why didn't I think of that? Because I had my own lenses on, right? And I think it's so important for us to check our biases and to check and check in with other groups to get that diversity of thought, because we're not going to have it if we don't do it. And the other point I wanted to make, which Cindy said something about earlier, is it's work. It takes work. And I think that is something I think that employers worry about. Like, are they saying the right things? Are they doing the right things? Are they going to upset people by focusing on DEI? And now you've got this whole other political piece to it too, where we could get into trouble if we're having DEI. And also, if you want DEI to work in your organization, you have to be intentional about it.
Yeah. You know, Michelle, we're a very large country, right? 300 million. I don't know what the number of people in the United States are, but very large country. And in this country, we have people from all different lived experiences, cultural backgrounds, coming from, around the world, all kinds of histories that are here. And it strikes me that as CEOs or companies are weighing the risk of doing DEI, for whatever reason, the risk is always directed in one direction, sort of the risk of upsetting a particular group. But there's risk on the other end too, because while you're thinking about, well, will I upset someone by doing this DEI program? And we, know who they're thinking about upsetting. What about all the other people who are in this country and are trying to make a life and a living and, also deserve consideration? And I think that's where, just to point out Target's big mistake, they were very concerned about the risk of DEI as it related to upsetting a particular group of people, not anticipating the other side of the risk, which is the backlash that they've gotten over a company that had seemingly embraced so many different communities. I know I was religiously shopping at Target, and every year I wait for their Black History Month drop and things of that nature. That got chopped off at the knees the minute they said that they were ending DEI, and we've seen the last couple of months they've just been bleeding revenue over it. And so, yes, there is risk to be managed. I mean, I think there's risk in all kinds of things that we do in business, but I find it curious as to which risk people find, more important to manage.
Mm-hmm.
I think, so let me put my, CXO hat on, and, I'm the CXO. I'm at this organization. I need to make a decision on, do I stick with DEI? Do I let it go, or do I rebrand it in some way? What should someone do? What are the practical steps that someone should be thinking about doing if they want to navigate this, really avoid as much consequences as possible, because there are a variety of stakeholders to consider, but also wants to, uphold DEI. Like, what should leaders do to navigate this situation?
Would you like me to start?
It's a tough question. So that I got my gin and tonic, boom. And then I just threw it out there.
I have a thought, but I really want to hear Cindy. I mean, my initial thought, and I feel like a broken record because I think I say that's on every call, is to lean in and start talking to your team, start talking to your employees, and find out where we're doing well and where are the opportunities for improvement.
Yeah, I would agree. I always advocate for speaking with team members and understanding their experiences, their specific needs. I would also, in some sense, it's as good a time as any to maybe even go back to the basics. So what is your mission? What are your organizational values? What outcomes are you hoping for in terms of your culture and your people? And I would think about how some of the principles or efforts related to DEI encourages or helps the organization move toward those goals. I'll probably say two more quick things in terms of just practically working through this. I think it's also a great time to re-examine any DEI efforts and really think about how you put rigor around it, the way that we do with any other important business priority. So there should be, real strategy, a budget, resources, KPIs, right? Like part of the the dig, I think, against some of the efforts that popped up recently is there's just no meat around them. It seems very either window dressing or performative, but we can really think about how are we structuring the space such that we have data, such that we are, again, doing a lot of the things that we know moves any business activity forward. So I would be thinking about like that as it relates to making sure that people are investing in the right things and that those things are moving them toward their goals. And then the last thing I'll say is I think companies would just be smart in 2025 with the environment that we're in to understand any legal or compliance risks that they may be exposed to. And I'm seeing organizations, not necessarily, yes, there are some in the big headlines that are moving away from DEI, but a lot of them are also just being more measured and thoughtful about it. So do we start to call it something different? Do we embed it in places in different ways? Does it move to a different part? Does the work move to a different part of the organization? So the one thing that has been slightly encouraging in a time that's been very overwhelming, I know for people in this DEI space, is that I don't know that we're seeing the mass exodus away from DEI the way that we may have thought it might have happened a couple months ago. I think more companies are saying, actually, we do want this for XYZ reasons, but we just have to figure out how we do it in a way that doesn't expose the company to, or have the company become a target, if you will. No pun intended, since I mentioned target a couple months ago.
I also think that I think employees, if you're having conversations with employees, are going to tell you they want these programs. They want to be included. They want to know that they have an opportunity to grow, whatever that looks like for them. I was talking with a fellow HR rebel the other day, and we were going through his resume because he's looking for a new opportunity. And I said, oh, there was something in his summary up top. And I was like, maybe you just move that to the bottom. And it was that he's bilingual in Spanish, and which is an amazing thing. And he said to me, you know what? If a company doesn't want to pursue me because that's in my summary, and I don't want to work there. I'm not going to hide who I am just to get a job. And I think, bravo, right? I think that was great. I'm glad he shared that with me. But I think that's what we're seeing with our employees is that they don't want a cloak. They want to be able to bring their whole self and be accepted and have a voice and be heard.
And to that point, Michelle, right? We're dealing with the new generation, right? It's a new generation. It's the newer generation, in this workforce and continuously enter. It's a different mindset and what they, I saw something online that was super, super interesting. And I'll spare the details, but he was kind of explaining the differences in what each generation looked for. Our grandparents' generation, it was more about stability, and they'll, work one job for 40 years. They didn't necessarily like it. The loyalty wasn't really there, but the options were few. And so that's why they kind of stayed. Versus our parents' generation, it was more about quality of life, I believe, he said. And so it was about, okay, I want to build a family and, give my kids a certain level of opportunity. And that was their motivating factor. And still stayed at roles decent amount of time. But again, it was a little bit more opportunistic. And the younger generations, it's more about quality of life. And so now that quality of life is the main thing, an organization, if they're not offering that, is really kind of missing the quote unquote product to the employee. And so, just the different tastes and preferences that matter to the newer generation that's becoming more and more of our workforce is just different. And organizations, same way you would treat, you would notice these trends with your customer. It's very important to notice these trends with your employees and your workforce to make sure that you're offering the right thing at the right level. And I think, DEI plays a big part of that as well. Yeah.
Well, this has been great. Any closing thoughts, Cindy or Dom?
I throw it to Cindy. She's our guest. So, Cindy, you get to give any closing thoughts on this.
Well, I didn't prepare any closing thoughts. I'm just thinking about the theme here in terms of to stick with DEI or ditch DEI, and I guess I'll leave you with, I think it's so much more nuanced than that in terms of what I'm seeing. And while my initial reaction to the executive orders and seeing, some of the companies that were retreating was one of panic, I actually think that we have a moment, because organizations aren't moving away, in mass numbers from DEI. I think we have a moment to really rethink, why do we want to do this? What are our values? And how do we do this in a way that makes it even more sustainable? And a lot of that is really embedding more of the work into just the operations of our businesses and how we get things done and all of that. But how do we do this in a way that is more sustainable so that we're not necessarily threatened by some of these social political movements, that we don't always have control over. So I think that we have an opportunity if we use this moment in the right way.
I love that. Love that. Cindy, you are our first guest, and it was a beta test, and I love it. I think it's great to have another opinion at the table here, and it was great to hear your insights. I've learned a lot. I'm sure everybody else listening has as well. So thank you very much for joining us.
Appreciate
Absolutely. Absolutely. I see a part two, and somewhere in the not too distant future. So
we need it to be
absolutely.
continued.
Thank you so much, Cindy.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you, Neha.
Oh, thanks, Neha, in the background.